In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to create and use classes within C#. Classes, as we noted earlier in this series of lessons, are the basic building block from which all applications will be created within any .NET application. It's very easy to create a new class. All you have to do is make sure that you type the class statement within the namespace curly braces. So in this application, we'll go ahead and add an additional class underneath our existing class that was created by default by the boilerplate for our application. So in this case, we're going to create a class named Point. And we'll add the curly braces. And what we'll do is add two public properties to our Point class, X and Y. Now what I want to do is change the existing class's name, and we'll call this Point User. And then we'll actually consume that class within our application. And to do that, we'll create a new instance of Point. And then we'll write out the values of the class Point. I actually meant to make that D. So now what we'll do is build our solution. And it appears that I was missing capital letters here. That should work. Or maybe not. Okay, we'll get it right here eventually. There we go. So one thing that you need to know about C# is that it's very sensitive to these kinds of things, which if you're coming from a VB environment, it is quite a learning curve from that perspective, a little bit frustrating that sometimes it doesn't capitalize things. And there's good reason for that. I mean, this is by design, however, it's just something that we're not used to as Visual Basic developers. So anyway, I rebuilt the application, and now what we'll do is we'll test it within our command console. So we'll open our command window, and I've already navigated to the appropriate folder, 2308, within my hard drive. So we'll run 2308, and we'll notice that the value is 00, just like we'd expect, because the values of X and Y were not initialized to any value. So this is about as simple an example of a class and the use of a class that we can possibly make. Let's go back and explain some of the things that are in the class. First of all, a class is basically a definition of a new type. And so when we create a new type, we're also able to use an instance of that type, or that class rather. It's kind of like the difference between having the plans for a new house and then actually building an instance of those plans. Here is a definition of what those plans should look like, but this is where we actually create an instance of those plans and actually create our new house, if you follow the analogy. In this case, when we created this class, we only had properties, for example, an X and a Y. But there's also, we have the ability to create methods that belong to that class as well. To set up this example, the first thing I want to do is turn these public variables into private ones. The general rule of thumb is that nothing should be made public unless it has to be. This really gets to the heart of the concept of encapsulation within object-oriented programming. The data is not directly accessible from outside the class, but it is only exposed through the use of methods. Within these methods, you can do some pre-compilation work. For example, you can check to make sure that the user even should have access to this information. Or if the data has not been retrieved yet, you can initialize the values of x and y. This allows the classes to be better in control of the actual values that it exposes through the use of methods. So to illustrate the idea of encapsulation, what we'll do is create two types of methods for each of our variables, x and y. We'll create an accessor and a modifier. If you're coming from the Visual Basic world, you might have recalled the use of get and let statements. This is the C# equivalent. The get statement is basically an accessor. It allows you to return a value back to the consumer of the class. The set statement is a modifier. It allows you to change the value of your variable, your private variable that's within the class. Notice my use of uppercase and lowercase variables that are used within C#. I can use the same variable. The case makes it a different variable. So now that I've created my accessor and modifier methods within my class, I can also create a special kind of method called a constructor. And the constructor allows us to initialize values as soon as the instance of that class is created by the application that consumes this class. So what we'll do to create our constructor is simply do a public point and here we will initialize the values of x and y. Okay, so what if we didn't have a constructor? Well, what we would have to do in that case is use our set values, our modifiers within our calling application to preset the values. So in this case, what we'll do is p dot set x equal to 1 and p dot set y equal to 2. And then we're going to change this because we no longer have public access to the actual variables. We change them to private in scope. The way we access these is through our accessor methods of get x, get x, and get y. We'll save it. We'll do a build. It succeeded. So we'll now try 2308. And we'll notice that the values of 1 and 2, which were initialized within the calling application, have been set indeed in the app, and we see the values 1 and 2 appear. But there's an easier way to do this through our constructor. So let's remove these two statements, but still set the values of x and y This time we'll do it in our constructor. In fact, let's change them to be so that we know there's nothing up our sleeves as we do this. We'll save it. We'll build the solution. And now we'll run it again. So our constructor, as you'll note here, allows us to set our values as the instance of the class is created. In this case, we initialized a 3 and 4. We got rid of our set statements so that we never modified the value that was the values of x and y, and yet they were still accessible through our accessor methods as we printed them out to the screen. As we conclude this video on C# classes, I just want to go over the basics that we talked about. First of all, to create a class, what you do is use a class statement, we give a name to the class, and then we also use the curly braces to enclose the items that belong to the class. In this case, we have a beginning curly brace and an ending curly brace. Also, we have a constructor. If you do not create a constructor, one will be created for you by C#. In this case, we created a constructor and we initialized some values in the constructor. You can override constructors as well and have multiple constructors for your class, and we'll discuss that in a future video. But you can also have methods like the methods that we created, the accessors and the modifiers, to set and get the values of x and y. You can also have properties like we did when we first created our class. We had a public int x and y. Those are considered properties. Or we can have fields, which are ultimately private members of the class, like we changed x and y to as illustrated here in x and y. But you can also have indexes and operators, and we'll go through each of these items in detail in future videos in the C# series. We hope that this helps you understand a little bit more about how to create classes, since they are the basic building block within C#, and that you enjoyed this video. Thank you.